John Marshall was born September 24, 1755, and lived in the Virginia frontier. John Marshall was the oldest of 15 siblings. Marshall was homeschooled as a child. He also joined the military at 20 years old because his good friend George Washington asked him to. He was later then appointed lieutenant. He led his battalion to success at the Battle of the Great Bridge, and then let the Americans gain control of Virginia. George Washington then appointed him as chief legal officer. In 1780, John Marshall left the military to go to law school. He then studied at William & Mary in Williamsburg, Virginia. John Marshall started his law practice the same year. He defended against British creditors who tried to collect debt against Americans. He then joined the Virginia House of Delegates in 1782. He ran for city council but lost in 1785. In 1788, he became a delegate at the state convention. In 1798, John Marshall turned down the Supreme Court job, but he still participated in a diplomatic mission in 1797 called XYZ Affair. In 1799, Marshall was elected to a seat in the U.S. House of Representatives, a position he would hold only briefly as he appointed Secretary of State under President John Adams. One of Marshall's first landmark cases was Marbury v. Madison, which established the basis of judicial review case went to Supreme Court in 1803. He served a 34-year term as Chief Justice. He died July 6, 1835 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He was buried in Shawco, Richmond, Virginia, next to his wife.
You guys want to hear a PowerPoint on Dred Scott versus Sanford? No? Didn't think so. Who's got gum? I'm confused. Okay, here's my question. Does anybody know what the court case was called before Dred Scott versus Sanford? Anybody? Daniel Lopez. That's a first. Alright, let me hear it. Dred Scott versus Emerson. Wow, let's give a round of applause to Daniel. Alright, let's get to the PowerPoint. Dred Scott was born as a slave in Virginia in 1795 and sold to his owner, Peter Blow, a Missouri plantation owner. After Peter Blow's death in 1832, Scott was transferred to the ownership of Dr. John Emerson, who was an army surgeon. Emerson brought Scott back with him to the free slave state of Illinois. In 1836, after 2 years in Illinois, Scott was brought with Dr. Emerson to a fort in Wisconsin, also a free slave state territory. Emerson brought Scott from Missouri, a slave state, to Illinois, which was a slave-free state, then back to Missouri in 1838, according to the Missouri Compromise, any states above Missouri are a free slave state. In 1846, Scott sued Emerson's widow. He claimed that switching from states broke all ties he had of being a slave. When the case was first brought up in the lower court of St. Louis in 1847, it was decided that Scott and his family were property. But in 1850, the verdict of the retrial was in Scott's favor. But then, the Missouri Supreme Court reversed the lower court ruling, and Scott's lawyers had appealed their case to the United States Supreme Court. In 1854, when the case was brought to the U.S. Supreme Court, the case became known now as Dred Scott versus Sanford. This is because John F. Sanford was the brother of Miss Emerson, who was in charge of her estates. And according to the Supreme Court ruling of Dred Scott versus Sanford, Dred Scott was considered property. This meant that the Missouri Compromise was not constitutional. This meant that slavery was allowed throughout the states.